So welcome back. We're going to move this painting a little bit farther. So to remind you where we were, you start, now I saved this from yesterday, but you start with a palette that has your white, primary yellow, primary red, primary blue, the brown, which is the burnt umber, and then a little bit of the burnt umber and blue mixed together. There's your palette. If you notice, it's on top of that white medium, the gloss glazing liquid, the one that hopefully you marked the top as slow. So I'm going to put a little bit more of that on there since I used some yesterday while we were painting. So now there's the starting point. White, yellow, red, blue, burnt umber brown, and then a little bit of the burnt umber brown with a little bit of the blue mixed together to give you a mixed black. So now we're moving. This was that yellowish brown ground that was over the canvas. Did a very light pencil sketch, found what was above the horizon and painted it white for what will eventually be the sky, and then using that mixed black, worked a sketch in that is monochromatic, meaning you're only using that one color, that one mixed black, to get your sketch in place. So this is a technique where you're not worrying about color in that first phase. So this is where you were aiming at the end of yesterday's class. Now you've got that basic sketch in place, and I moved to this different format so maybe it's a little bit easier to see. So I'm going to grab a brush. I'm just grabbing a round, so one of those little brushes that has that sort of typical flame kind of shape on the top. And I'm going to actually mix a color. So I know that this all has pale yellows, and let me grab my image. So this is what I'm working with as that reference. So my reference photo was a very late spring, early summer kind of green foliage. So it's off your camera, or it's off the camera slightly, but I'm looking at that and I'm going to now mix some color. And my mixing palette is up here. So I'm going to take some yellow because yellow is one of the two primaries that is in any green. And when I look at the yellows that are in my photo, my reference, it's a very, very yellowish green. So I took a lot of yellow, a very little bit of the blue, and I'm going to mix them together. And I'm going to see if I like what I'm getting. And you can keep mixing and you don't use just one. Okay, so at that point I have a green that I sort of like, but I think it's a little artificial. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take a tiny dab of that brown, mix it in there. And I'm looking and I'm going to still take another tiny dab because I want my green to be a tiny bit less plastic looking, a little more organic. So now that little bit of brown I've added, I'm remixing to make sure I get a nice, so I sort of like what I have. Now you're going to start working just like you were before, but now you're actually going to, so I'm not painting that tree just a big old green. Instead, I'm looking at what I see in my photo, and notice how I'm almost trying to make my strokes feel like the patterns that I see in the tree. So I'm not painting this solidly with that first green that I mixed. When I look at my photo, the light is hitting more towards the top. So I'm going to keep this much lighter green focused a little bit more on that top area, and then where it opens up into this path, the light is getting down there, so I see a little bit more of it. So I worked some of that around, and I'm going to keep, I don't want to make all my trees that one green everywhere. So I'm going to work a little bit of that through. But I noticed that these trees are a little bit less of a brilliant green than that green I mixed. So I've got a little bit of it up there, but I see a lot more of that green. In fact, I'm going to take another brush load of yellow, because when I look at the grasses, they're even lighter. So I took that yellow, and I didn't put it in the middle. See how I moved it off to the side? Because it's a lot harder to change all that color. So there, I just changed a little bit what's on the side, and I have that brilliant yellowish green now. And what I'm going to do is I'm looking at where those grasses are, and I'm going to stroke my color. In this case, the grasses are coming up in front of the shadows. So as I stroke that green, that nice light green that I just mixed, I'm not trying to cover everything right now. We're doing this in stages. So I can, by putting that in already, this is lighter than what's behind it. I'll go back there and I'll take a little bit more of that. And I see that some of these grasses over here that almost feel like in that photo I'm using for reference, which you also have, if you like the way this is looking, you can use this photo. There was a link for you that took you to these photos when you can download from that link if you wanted to. So I see those light greens coming in there. And I'm going to take a little bit more yellow because I already used up what I'd mixed. I'm staying off to the side. And I see that some of the greens that are in my reference photo get really, really pale. So I don't want, when you use white, you have to be careful. So I'm just going to take a little bit of the white. Bang, that makes that green jump to a much, much lighter green. So then I'm going to say, oh my gosh, those greens that are on the side of that dirt path are really brilliant greens. So I'll just put, and notice how this is called scumbling. I'm working on the side of my brush. And I'm not trying to cover all of that sketch that I had, because it's sort of nice having that dark value as a foundation, as a shadow under some of these. I see that little bit of grass that's trying to grow in the middle of that dirt path. So I'll take this nice light and I'll just use that to suggest where some of those grasses are. I'm still rolling that brush on its side. Now I've suggested some of those grasses in the middle of that path. I can take, I'll just grab a little tiny bit more white, grab some more of that yellow. I still have that big pool over here of that original green I mixed. So I'm just taking some of that together with these colors I'm adding off on the side. And in this case, I've got that really brilliant. And I notice on mine, way back, it's really light, so that distance, the most background part of this path, is being flooded with light, so it's the lightest. So now all of a sudden I'm starting to see, and I see that light on the side of the path. And it's not even because it's where some of the sun is coming through. And then I see some of these grasses are also catching that much brighter light that's on my brush. Notice now I'm using the brush in strokes that feel like those grasses. Some of that brilliant light is hitting down here. So notice, in no place did I take one green and just paint everything. So at this point, I've got a foundation of those greens in. What I can do, I now have a light value on my brush. I can't take this brush and use it to go darker because that dulls the color. If I add dark to this, it's called toning. It's darkening, but it's also making it gray. So I would have to clean that brush if I wanted to stay with that brush. But I'm going to just go ahead and grab another brush. Put that one in the water, and I grabbed a flat. So maybe it's a little bigger than I want, but it'll do. And just keep looking. So I'm looking, oh my gosh, there's some dirt in that path, but it also has a little grass on it. So I'm going to take a brush load of that brown. And let's see, if I want that to be light, that means I grab some white. So I'm tinting the brown. Anytime you add white to a color. It's called a tint. And I'm looking at that, and that's a little flatter than I want, so I'm going to just add a tiny bit of red, because red to brown will make it a little bit more orange. And I'm not liking that, so I need a little tiny bit of yellow so that that red I added stays more orange. I'm liking that color that I've mixed there when I'm looking at the color that's in that path. So this isn't a bad start. Keeping my brush, I'm thinking, okay, a path is flat, so I'm making the strokes through that path in horizontal strokes. So they relate to the direction, the flatness of the ground that you would be walking on there. So my paint is getting really dry, and remember, it's better to use medium. Water is not what you necessarily want to use to thin. So I'm just going to pull a little bit of that, and that dirt is all through that path. So I'm letting my strokes of color move and break up the edge a little bit so the path doesn't look as though it's paved. I'm even letting some of that dirt show up through the grass that I added in there. So now and notice I'm not trying to finish this. Now I have a path hinted inside of this. I have the greens that have started going through all of the different grasses and trees, but I still have that white sky. So that's going to be the last thing I'm going to address for this part of my demonstration. So I'm looking at my brushes, and I picked one. It's a little bit beat up because I should have taken care of my brushes better, but I grabbed, it's soft. I don't know if you can see how I'm putting my fingers through it. It's not a real stiff brush. And I know that when I look at this particular scene that I'm painting has a nice blue springtime kind of cloudy sky. So when I look at it, I need a smaller brush. So I'm going to grab, it might work better. So there's a soft, it's a round. So I grab that brush. I'm going to make sure that on my brush I get a nice full clean brush load of just glazing liquid. So once again, whenever I'm grabbing that, remember that's this stuff that says slow, the gloss glazing liquid. That's the purpose of that, is it is transparent and it slows, it doesn't dry fast. Because the other material you have, the gloss medium and varnish, is the plastic that is at the core of acrylic paint, but it dries really fast. So we don't want to be using that one right now. So I have my gloss glazing liquid, the slow, and I'm going to just take a little bit of the blue. So I didn't take much. I'm looking what's on my brush, and I almost took too much. So now I'm going to mix that in with that medium, that gloss glazing liquid. And because this is transparent, it's going to be much brighter. Think of the white on the canvas almost like a light that's going to be shining through stained glass, because this is a transparent blue. And I'm looking at where the blue is, where the sky shows through, and I'm going to paint the clouds and the sky by painting the sky in around the shapes I want to suggest for the sky. Because this is transparent, I can pull it right through those trees. Now I have not had to reload, meaning I haven't had to dip back in with my brush, because that's got so much medium that it's, so I just took a little brush load again of that gloss glazing liquid. I'm looking at that sky goes behind those trees. You have some cloud there, and then there's another area where you can see the sky through. And I can come through where there's some light showing through that tree still. And it looks like at the very bottom, there's just a slight hint. The bottom of those clouds by the horizon where they start to thin and you can see the blue through it. So now I might just brush through that if I want it to look smooth. Drop my brush in the water. And now when I hold that under the light, you can see how much you got done. I still see some of the really, really dark original sketch, and that's fine. Because at this point, you're not trying to finish the painting in one round. In fact, we've already done ground on the whole canvas, pencil sketch, then a dark monochromatic value sketch over the whole piece, and now we went through and began to locate the specific color that refers to what we're seeing, the grass, the trees, the dirt, the sky, and we're going to let it dry. And what I'm going to recommend is when you've worked through this, everything on mine, not quite everything is dry, the sky is not. But when it's dry, I'll take a little bit of this gloss medium. Now that's not the one marked slow. This is the acrylic gloss medium in varnish. And I'm going to just put about this much. So it's a lot like when we were doing that first coat. So I'm just going to squeeze out, and mine's, of course, clogged like it usually is. So I put much too much down, so I'm going to grab a brush. You don't want that much. Mine clogged, and then it all of a sudden. So I'm putting some of mine back into the jar. There we go. And all I'm going to do is put a light coat when it's dry. Take that medium, the gloss medium, and put a nice light coat over your whole piece. Note, that's sort of quarter to $half kind of size should be enough to get over the whole piece. I'm not painting right there because mine isn't dry yet in that one area. I'm going to get some of that medium over the whole thing. I'm going to let that dry, and then this is ready for what will sort of be the last round, the last time that we'll go back into it and refine the light and shadow of what's there. So you're probably 60 or 70% done with the painting at this point. Okay, so I will see you all in person the next time.